Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929. He was the middle son of Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Mother Alberta King. His birth name was Michael King, but his father changed his name and his son's name in 1934 following a trip to Germany. He chose to be called Martin Luther King in honor of the German reformer Martin Luther. When Martin Luther King Jr. was 10 years old, he sang with his church choir at the Atlanta premiere of the movie Gone with the Wind. He liked singing in the choir so much that he joined the junior choir at his father's church. Growing up in Atlanta, he became known for his ability to speak publicly, something he learned while watching his father, who was a minister at Ebenezer Baptist Church. His ability to speak in public led him to join his high school debate team. An excellent student, he graduated early from high school and attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, when he was only 15 years old. King graduated from Morehouse College in 1948 at the age of 18 with a degree in sociology. He immediately enrolled in Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania to further his desire for religious studies. While at Crozer, he was elected president of the student body. He graduated in 1953 and began to study for his doctorate at Boston University. While in Boston, he met Coretta Scott, who was in Boston on scholarship with the New England Conservatory of Music. 2 weeks after meeting Coretta, Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to his mother that he had met his wife. Martin and Coretta married on June 18, 1953, on the lawn of her parents' house in Alabama. Martin Luther King would graduate with his doctorate degree in 1955. In the 1950s, many cities had Jim Crow laws, which limited the rights of African Americans. These laws enforced racial segregation, such as requiring African Americans only to attend African American schools. Another requirement of Jim Crow laws was for African Americans to ride the back of the bus and for them to give up their seats to white customers when the buses were full. In 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for not giving up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Martin Luther King Jr., who was the minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, led a boycott of buses run by the city of Montgomery, Alabama. At one point, things got so tense in Montgomery that in January of 1956, his house was bombed. King arrived home to check on his family. He was greeted by an angry mob, many of whom were armed with guns. Martin Luther King Jr. settled the crowd by giving a speech similar to the sermons he gave every week in his church. For over a year, African Americans refused to ride the buses in Montgomery. Instead, they walked or drove to work. In 1965, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the laws in Montgomery were not fair. It was the first time that Martin Luther King Jr. had demonstrated nonviolent opposition as a means of protesting unfair laws. King urged his followers not to fight back if they were faced with violence. He said, "Violence may win a temporary victory, but it cannot win a permanent peace." The Montgomery bus boycott was the start of the civil rights movement, and its leader was Martin Luther King Jr. In 1957, he and other civil rights activists founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The group put into practice the tactics of nonviolent protests with great success. There were often dramatic standoffs with segregationist authorities. Sometimes these confrontations turned violent. One of the group's inspirations was the Crusades of evangelist Billy Graham, who befriended King after he attended a Graham Crusade in 1957. In 1960, Dr. King went back to Atlanta to join his father as a minister at Ebenezer Baptist Church. He was arrested in 1962 in Albany, Georgia, for leading a peaceful, nonviolent demonstration against the city. He was given a choice of paying a fine or 45 days in jail. He chose to go to jail. However, 3 days later, he was unexpectedly released. The King Center later acknowledged that Billy Graham had paid Dr. King's fine. In 1963, Dr. King led a march on Washington, D.C. More than 250,000 people of diverse ethnicities marched in the event. The protesters filled the Lincoln Memorial and spilled onto the National Mall. At the time, it was the largest gathering of protesters in Washington, D.C.'s history. The March on Washington is where Martin Luther King delivered his most famous and prolific speech, now known as the I Have a Dream speech. Dr. King continued to organize and lead marches for African Americans to have the right to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and other basic civil rights. Many of these rights were successfully enacted into law with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. In 1964, Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize. The enactment of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act were a big step in the right direction, but Dr. King knew his work wasn't finished. Over the next 4 years, he led nonviolent campaigns in Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, New York, and Chicago. On March 7, 1965, the most violent protest occurred in Selma, Alabama. The protest began as a peaceful march from Selma to Montgomery, the capital of Alabama, before they were met by an angry mob and police. The day has become known as Bloody Sunday. The footage of the police brutality against the protesters was broadcast extensively and aroused national public outrage, and was a major turning point in the efforts to turn public opinion in favor of the civil rights movement. Dr. King was not there due to work at his church in Atlanta. He petitioned President Lyndon Johnson to pardon the protesters who had been arrested. Dr. King went to Selma on March 9th and led marchers to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where he led everyone in prayer. On March 25th, he led a march from Selma to the Alabama state capitol in Montgomery, where he rallied the crowd to peacefully stand up against the violence. On April 4, 1968, King was in Memphis, Tennessee to support the striking workers of the sanitation department. As he stood on the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel speaking to a crowd of supporters below, he was shot by James Earl Ray, an escaped convict. Although emergency surgery was performed at St. Joseph's Hospital, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. passed away at the age of 39. 3 days later, President Lyndon Johnson declared April 7th a National Day of Mourning. Dr. King's funeral was held at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. James Earl Ray would eventually be captured 2 months later and was sentenced to 99 years in jail. Just days after King's assassination, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, commonly known as the Fair Housing Act, which prohibited discrimination in housing on basis of race, religion, or national origin. This legislation was seen as a tribute to King's struggle in his final years to combat residential discrimination in the U.S. After his death, Coretta Scott King continued to be active in matters of social justice and civil rights until her death in 2006. She established the King Center in Atlanta, Georgia, the same year that Martin Luther King Jr. died, dedicated to preserving his legacy and the work of nonviolent conflict resolution and tolerance worldwide. Beginning in 1971, some cities and states established annual holidays to honor Dr. King. On November 2, 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill creating a federal holiday to honor Dr. King. President George Bush moved the holiday to be observed on the third Monday of January each year to be closer to Dr. King's birthday. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy continues today. Memorials to him have been erected all over the world in places such as Israel, South Africa, England, Ireland, Hungary, Ghana, New Delhi, and in many states in America. His method of nonviolent protest has been used in struggles around the world in such places as Ireland and protest against apartheid in South Africa. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dedicated his life to bring equality and fairness to all people, regardless of their skin color.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last."